Okanagan Lake all the way down to the American border, with only a couple of small exceptions, was under the control of one man, Tom Ellis, one of the great cattle barons of British Columbia. The streets at Penticton bear the names they do because Tom Ellis named them. He laid out the town. He built the school, he built the hotel, he built the dock, he built the church. Part of his original church is part of the existing Anglican church in Penticton today. Then one day he sold it all and never came back. Randy Manuel, the curator of the Penticton Museum, tells us the story of Tom Ellis on this episode of Pioneers and Places. Welcome to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts talking with the curator of the Penticton Museum, the R.N. Atkinson Museum, Randy Manuel, about a man who became a cattle baron in the southern interior of British Columbia. There were others. There was O'Keefe, and there were Greenough, and there was Haynes, but then there was Tom Ellis.
He's from Ireland. He's Protestant Irish. He decides, and he comes from a reasonably well-off family, and he decides to come out to British Columbia and seek his fortune.
1865, just after the Caribou Gold Rush.
Just after the Caribou Gold Rush, things are really happening out here. He leaves in January of 1865, lands in Victoria in the middle of March after sailing out of Southampton, comes around across the Caribbean through the Panama and up to Victoria.
And when he gets here, it's not like any 19-year-old getting off the boat. He has letters of introduction.
All the proper white Anglo-Saxon Protestant boys of upper crust families would have had these letters of introduction to be able to meet the important people that you would want to get to know, that would make you socially, politically, and financially acceptable in the new Crown colonies of Vancouver Island and British Columbia.
Now, I'm trying to get a picture of this guy. I mean, it sounds at first like he's a dandy, but is he reasonably athletic and rough-hewn and capable as well?
He is, and like a lot of these young fellows that come out, they're out for adventure. He comes from a large family, so there's no ability to be able to grab land wealth in the British Isles in those days, and so a lot of these young fellows come out, and that is one of the things that they're doing. They're slightly different than remittance men, but certainly they are the precursors of the remittance man, in which they need to come out here to be able to get their own land wealth.
So, and he comes from a well-to-do family, so he's coming with he's got some cash in his pockets.
Oh gosh, yes, because he manages to be able to pay for a lot of services, and obviously to be able to, I would suspect, to be able to wine and dine himself to the people that he's being introduced to.
When does he finally decide, I guess when weather allows, he makes his way toward the interior?
He's pretty anxious. He wants to get going. Clearly, he doesn't understand probably the depth of snow that lay in the passes. But nonetheless, they have to wait, and they go upriver on the Reliance, which is a small paddle wheeler, to Fort Hope. This is quite an adventure in itself, because the Fraser is in full flood, and it takes them several days to get to Harrison and where they pull into the river mouth there. And upon leaving Harrison, the boat gets impaled on a sandbar, so Ellis with the rest of the passengers and crew have to help yard this thing off the sandbar and continue further upriver, where it gets snagged up in heavy currents again and heaves to the bank. And at this point, Ellis gets anxious, and he's impatient like any young guy, and he gets off the ship.
He doesn't want his adventure to end in a drowning at the age of 19.
He heads off to Hope on foot and waits there until the boat arrives the next day with the rest of his parcels. But in the meantime, because he's arrived essentially a day in advance on foot, he's able to get all the packs and horses assembled and ready for the inward trip that will take them from Fort Hope up over Allison's and Dewdney's Trail.
Dewdney is still building his trail. This is a new trail.
Yes, it is. It's relatively new, and it's a good thing that it had been hacked out, because he talks about being the first 13 miles out of Hope, and the horses and the animals and the men being bogged down in snow. And they decide then to start to travel at night when it's still cold enough to be able to walk on top of the snow. And it takes them roughly 7 days then to get from Fort Hope to Princeton at Allison's ranch.
Gosh, we do that drive now in a couple hours or less.
That's right.
And you took them 7 days to make that trip over that pass.
7 days to get to John Fall Allison's ranch at Princeton.
Right. So when he gets there, what's his, I mean, he discovers that there are some other people who've already been on the ground for a while.
Certainly. He's certainly impressed with Mrs. Allison, and of course she's happy to see somebody coming through. They take only a day to leave Allison's to get down to Barrington Price's place at Karamia. Actually, Barrington Price is there, but the mill hasn't been started yet. But the Hudson's Bay Post is there. And just another day to be able to get up over Richter's Pass and into Suyas, where he meets up with J.C. Haynes. And that's where things start to get interesting. J.C.
Haynes, of course, is the customs agent and mega landowner of the extreme southern part of the Okanagan Valley.
Yeah, he represents the Crown in Suyas for a number of things, as gold commissioner, as a judge, and as a constable. Anything that needs to be done to look after the colony's needs, such as taxing the cattle that are coming through from the Willamette Valley in Oregon. These are cattle that are heading north to the Caribou gold fields, where the drovers will sell the cattle there.
Yeah. So there's a tax applied to these, and if a drover just can't afford to pay the tax, he's got to sell some cattle.
What happens is then Haynes or his assistant would then tax the drovers a certain value in cattle, and then these cattle are kept at Suyas and then sold for cash to young entrepreneurs like Ellis and his friend Andy McFarland, or Lowe and Barcelo, or Richter or Kruger, any of the other settlers that are starting to move into the neighborhood over the next several years. That way, the Crown converts the cattle to cash.
And Ellis buys his first cattle around June of 1865, the start of a pretty big game.
He buys 7. And they already get him exercised in the business of cattle ranching, because the very next day they bolt and run across the line again. And he
have to pay tax on them for bringing them back again?
I hope he didn't, but nonetheless, he and Andy had to go riding down towards the future city of Oro and bring them back and find a fence and nail these critters down.
Right.
On the shores of Suyas Lake.
All right, going to take a break here because the man has now got a start on being a cattle baron. We're going to find out how he manufactures that particular title right after these words. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Randy Manuel of the Penticton Museum, talking about Tom Ellis, cattle baron. But at 19 years of age, with 7 heifers, he ain't a cattle baron yet.
But he's working on it, and he does it fairly rapidly.
Yeah?
He does a trip up to the head of the lake with a number of the officers of the court, and he passes through Penticton, doesn't think much of it. It's mosquito infested, he said, and he's not happy at all. Goes on, takes a look at Kelowna, takes a look at Vernon and O'Keefe's spread at the head of the lake, realizes, I think, most of the good ground is taken up, and with the help of Haynes and with his friend Andy McFarland, he does come back to Penticton and starts to plot out the first 320 acres of land in the central part of the city, kind of halfway between the two lakes. And by 1869, brand 69 is the registered brand for Ellis's Cattle Ranch.
69 is the registered brand?
Yes.
And who has that branding iron today? That would be
I would like to know.
69 head of cattle, pardon me, 65 head of cattle by 1869?
He's got quite a lot more than that, actually. We do know that he starts to gather a fair amount, because he actually goes down to the Willamette Valley and starts to buy cattle. And he's very astute, because he realizes that he should be buying particular breeds that are going to do well here. Not only did he acquire Penticton and realize that here's the best bottom haylands in which during the horrible winter of 80 and 81, he's the only rancher between Princeton and O'Keefe that doesn't have a loss of cattle over winter, because Penticton turns out to be probably the best spot that is snow-free, has good natural haylands. His ranch is located next to the Penticton Indian Reserve. He's got lots of help and labor with the Aboriginal cowboys to be able to help him. And he soon amasses about 10,500 acres between 9 Mile Point and the south end of Skaha Lake. And he's doing pretty well.
9 Mile Point is you head up toward Naramata, north from Penticton, all the way down to Skaha Lake.
That's right.
That's Ellis's property.
He takes all that good shrub steppe grassland country and he starts to fence it off so that he's got a high range and then he's got the low wind range. And the ranch is firmly established in the geographical center of the city with a small cottage and a boat landing down near the Penticton Creek mouth.
So we're talking here 1875 or so. I mean, what's financing him? How's he making his money?
He's taking off where the Americans had left off because they're stopped at the border. And so people like Ellis and O'Keefe and the rest of the ranches in the district are feeding their cattle north into the gold fields of the Caribou because they can drive them there at a cheaper rate and price. Plus, as the gold fields start to wind down, there's the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway. And so there's thousands of people there that need to be fed. And so the cattle can be taken there to be slaughtered. And once the railway is finished, then he only has to drive his cattle as far north as Sycamore's Junction on the Canadian Pacific Main Line. And he's got the ability to be able to then ship his cattle east or west. And he also starts to make alliances with other Okanagan and Similkameen ranchers in sharing of the cost of driving cattle to market. And he also gets into the slaughterhouse business himself with abattoirs in Calgary and New Westminster. So he's not just growing the cattle, he's also creating the end finished product.
When does he seek the need of to establish a family? When does that happen?
It depends on who you're talking to. Certainly, one or two members of the Penticton Indian band say that he already had an established family before he went back into the middle 1870s to Ireland to marry Wilhelmina Wade. And Wilhelmina comes out with her brother Alfred, and he helps to establish Penticton as a trading post and post office and a trading center catering to the miners that are now starting to filter south into the Kootenays, into the Similkameen country, and into the lower country such as Camp McKinney and Camp Fairview.
Did Wilhelmina like to be relocated from Ireland and her comforts to frontier British Columbia?
I suspect Wilhelmina had to be a very tolerant lady and probably wouldn't have known, as did a lot of women, what they were really getting themselves into. Because her social life, as far as being able to entertain other white women, was negligible. There was Mrs. Haynes in the South who they didn't have that good a relationship of. And there was Mrs. Allison, who often writes in her own diaries that her closest neighbor was Mrs. Ellis, and that they enjoyed visiting each other, but it only happened 2 or 3 times of the year, because both women were saddled with children. Wilhelmina eventually has 9, and Susan Allison eventually has 11.
Look at this house. This is the house that Ellis builds. This is a big house. I mean, it's not fancy by, fancy standards, but it is a substantial dwelling.
Eventually, as the family grows, he lifts the roof off and he extends the 2nd story up. And lumber is floated down the lake from sawmills at Vernon, because that's where the only sawmills are in the day. And the building is clad, and it's starting to look pretty good looking.
Yeah.
And with this new, larger, improved house, he also then starts to be able to entertain visitors coming through the country, such as the Mormons, who also tried to check out this place.
Card, after whom Cardston is named, actually makes it to
in
Ellis's house.
1885, he comes through, and he's checking out the Okanagan Valley. He mentions in his diary that he stopped at the cattle baron, Mr. Ellis, and he bought peaches and milk and flour, and then they made their way on up to the Mission and eventually onto Kamloops. And they disappeared out of British Columbia, realizing that O'Keefe, Greenhow, and Ellis and everybody else had already taken up the best of the bottomlands for ranching.
Tied that up. When does the falling out between Ellis and Haynes occur?
It occurs in the 1880s when Haynes borrows money to be able to improve his own holdings down at Suyas. But instead, he goes on a sojourn for 2 years, taking the entire family back to Ireland. And on his return, he doesn't have the funds available. And so something starts to take place. Haynes goes to New Westminster on business. Now, Haynes is probably not staying home to be able to run the ranch properly because he's got his finger in a lot of political pies. But unfortunately, Haynes, on his way home in 1885, up and has a heart attack at Allison's place in Princeton, and he dies. And Hester, his oldest daughter's worst fears come true. And she writes in her own diary that the rider comes in from Princeton to give her the awful news that father was dead. And the next day, they watch as they look over Suyas Lake and see the dust plume of the sad funeral cortege as it comes over Richter Pass, and the body is brought home and laid to rest in the green room of the Haynes family home on the shores of Suyas Lake. And everything is downhill for the Haynes family from that point on.
Because the next dust plume is Ellis coming down to collect a debt that they can't pay.
That's right. And that debt and that fight goes on for a number of years until it finally culminates in 1895.
Take a break here. We'll be back in just a second to find out just how merciless this man Ellis can be. We'll do that right after this break.
Dear Mrs. Emily Haynes, regarding the outstanding contract in question between your late husband and the Southern Okanagan Land Company, I am left with no other option but to again demand complete and total compensation due this company. Sincerely, Thomas Ellis.
Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Randy Manuel telling me the story of Tom Ellis. This guy is the villain who ties the woman to the tracks.
And what happens is that eventually he forecloses. He gets the Haynes property for $65,000. He doesn't even leave Emily a buckboard to be able to put what meager possession she has left. And she borrows one from a neighbor. They go over Anarchist Mount to Rock Creek to stay at her sister's place. And there's nothing left except a pigsty and an old miner's shack in which they drape a piece of canvas over the two structures, and that's where they end up living the rest of their days.
Well, did anybody say, Tom, have some forbearance, be kind?
Actually, Wilhelmina did. And Tom said, no, I have to because of the syndicates. And we never know what he means by the syndicates. That's a mystery.
That's the mystery. I've got some silver on the table here. This gives you a kind of an idea of how wealthy Ellis is becoming. How many, and now he's got Haynes's property, he's got his own property, he's got hotels, he owns a lake boat, he's in everything. He's rich.
He does very well by 1892. He's got all of the things that we've mentioned here. His children are gone off to private school and well educated. With only one sad event, and that is the death of his son Tom at age 21. But nonetheless, by the turn of the century, he's starting to get Yancey. He wants to be able to get rid of the place and retire. And so he starts to entertain the CPR to be able to create a new town, and he lays out the town site of Penticton. And he then decides that he needs a little bit more help because the CPR is being a little bit Yancey. They don't like to be nudged and pushed. And so instead, a group of fellows from Nova Scotia, the 4 Shatford brothers, but principally 2 out of the 4, become involved with Ellis in the South Okanagan Land Company, in which he's a shareholder. Now, Ellis already owns the steamboat, and which he did actually sell later on, the Okanagan Lakeshore Mining Company, which is a small mining venture just a half mile up the coast.
And on this picture, you actually see bags of ore waiting at the dock. That's ore from that mine.
From the mine, getting ready to be shipped out. And so when the Shatford brothers come along, he makes a proposal to them to be able to sell Penticton. The 30,000 acres, give or take a few, and the houses, the lands, the building, the town sites, the hotel, the whole shooting match, for $412,000.
$412,000 in what year?
1905, in fact, in January of 1905, the negotiations are finally settled and the papers signed, sealed, and delivered, and Ellis can't leave Penticton fast enough for Victoria, where he retires.
Now, $412,000, you'd multiply that, what, by 20 or 30 to get to sort of today's value figure?
Even if we did it at 20, just to be on the low side, that's a heck of a lot of cash. And Ellis certainly doesn't die a poor man, because when we take a look at his estate, when he finally dies in 1914, and you can see all the properties that he owns and the investments that he has in various companies, such as the Burns Meat Packing Company, because it's one of his daughters marries into that, into the Burns family, and property that he owns throughout Victoria, and investments in banks and other things. Ellis did very well, hence the silver services for the children and Mrs. Ellis.
This is some of his daughter's collection?
Yes, it is.
Well, how does all this money disappear? Or what happened to the money? He's got 9 children.
9 children, 1 dies. Actually, several of them die in their 30s. Ellis it almost implodes in that he doesn't have very many grandchildren, and the family essentially dissipates, and only 1 daughter ever came back to Penticton, and that was Dr. Kathleen Ellis, who came and retired in Penticton after an incredible career all over the world.
I get the sense that Tom Ellis is not one of those warm, fuzzy characters of British Columbia's history.
He was an enigma. He created a very poor paper trail, and he created a very poor trail from artifacts and other items left. And you would think that a city that the size of Penticton and what he did and what he established there would have been a larger presence of what he had done from 1865 to 1905. And there's very, very little, even in the provincial archives.
Next to the Anglican church, though, there's the little church that he built that has been moved to the site and preserved.
In 1892, the St. Saviour's Anglican Church was built as a thank offering by Ellis that was on his ranch property. In 1933, it was attached to the new church, and 112 years later, it's still used.
What an interesting story. But as you say, there are other chapters to be written, because what is this syndicate that is being referred to? Why did he have to deal with Haynes's wife so harshly?
And there are other items that Ellis had questionable deals with, such as haystack fires in Kelowna, in which it is insinuated that Ellis's men set them on fire and somebody else took the rap for it, a fellow by the name of Knox. There's very, very interesting things about Ellis that we don't know.
Randy Manuel, thank you for bringing up, maybe this is segment 1 of many on Tom Ellis. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Randy Manuel, curator of the Penticton Museum, and the story today, Tom Ellis, cattle baron.